Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today is day 2 of the auction of February 2023, and the first exclusively new tank in the auction will be this. It is the K-2. It is a tier 8 Soviet premium heavy tank. Yes, another one to add into the game. And this one is actually very well armored, including some incredibly troll side armor that I'm going to be showing you later on in the game. This vehicle definitely isn't about the firepower. It has bad DPM, a relatively bad gun, but it is a juggernaut with regards to its hit points and its armor. So if you're somebody who likes to last longer and doesn't really care about eliminating your opponents quickly, then maybe this one will be for you. There are going to be 20,000 of them available today in a bidding war for gold on the European server. And in today's video, I'm going to let you know everything there is to know about the vehicle so you can decide whether it's worth bidding on, or alternatively, if it's worth skipping and how to counter them, because they're going to be flooding the matchmaker. So before I jump into the gameplay with the K-2, let's compare it to the two best Soviet premium heavy tanks, at least in my opinion. Maybe not for fun, but with regards to being competitive, the Object 703 with the 122mm double barrel and the Defender. So immediately we notice that all of these vehicles use 122mm. However, the 703 has 2 barrels, and the Defender hits harder with 440, while the K-2 gets a rather mediocre 390 alpha damage in comparison. And it's got the same rate of fire as the Defender, even though it's got 50 less alpha damage, which means that its damage per minute is horrible on this tank. You aren't going to be killing anything quickly. To add to this, it's also got the worst penetration in this comparison at 203. So unless you load gold, spend credits, and have 270mm of heat pen, you're going to struggle. And I'd say the Defender, with its 265 of APCR pen, is actually better because you get that normalization. Unless, of course, you need to shoot targets that have over 70 degrees of angled armor. To add insult to injury, the K-2 standard rounds have 790 meters a second shell velocity, which is way worse than the other two tanks in this comparison. And it carries the same amount of ammo as the Defender, but remember, it hits for less. And so towards the end of the battle, you are going to struggle with having AP rounds and heat rounds loaded, especially if you don't know whether you're going to get into a tier 6 or a tier 10 matchup, where obviously you're going to need more heat. So bad news with regards to the firepower on the K-2. It's probably got the worst gun of any tank, I'd say, at tier 8 heavy. Next up, let's look at the gun handling. And while the aim time on the K-2 isn't bad at 2.9 seconds, boy, its gun handling is awful. 0.44 accuracy, the same as the other two tanks in this comparison, but look at the dispersion when it moves. 0.27 and 0.14 when it's turning the turret. Literally over twice as bad as the 703-2. And it's even worse than the Defender, which is not known for its gun handling. And remember, this one hits for 390 instead of 440 in the Defender. And the Defender came out like 5 or 6 years ago. You'd expect this thing to be a little bit better with regards to the gun handling. In fact, you could use a rotation device on the K-2 and it would be comparable to the Defender, but the Defender would just have an extra equipment slot if you were to do that. Really bad news for the K-2. Although the 6 degrees of gun depression is nice, it does make you a little bit more flexible than the 703-2 on a ridgeline. But with the 703-2, you could literally just go and take an aiming device and not use vert stabs, and then you'd be improving one of the worst aspects of the tank. Man, the K-2 is really suffering so far with regards to its firepower and its gun handling. Well, maybe it'll be good with regards to mobility. Not at all. This thing is very slow, 30 forwards, and it can't even get up to 30 across medium terrain because its ground resistances are poor, especially considering that it has a way worse power to weight ratio than the Defender has, meaning that this thing is sluggish. Look at the tank's traverse speed as well. It is really bad when you compound it with the ground resistances, giving this thing way worse effective traverse speed than the either two tanks. In fact, the Defender feels a bit more like a medium, able to turn at 30 degrees a second on hard compared to the K-2's awful 21 degrees a second. This is just absolutely horrendous news so far for the K-2. However, this is where it starts to get at least reasonably good news for the K-2, and that is the tank's armor. 160 at the front, 150 at the side, 250 on the turret, 160 on the side of the turret, and 1,650 hit points gives it the durability to be able to use this armor. So let's go and take a quick look at the K-2's armor. And this is where obviously it's going to look really good when you consider that it's got very poor penetration of 203. However, that lower plate, that is still weak. And while tier 6 tanks are not going to be able to deal with that, even if they load gold, even if they're firing flat into the lower plate of the tank, look what happens when we start to angle this tank. Look at that side armor. We're talking about 150 millimeters of side armor. So if you're completely flat onto your opponents, they still need 150 to get through. Also, this vehicle has a wing, an angled wing up on the top of the mid part of the hull, which means that you can over angle this and they're never going to be able to really get through that very thick side armor. The problem here is that if you want to try and hide that lower plate, you have to kind of angle your side armor to a point where you still only have about 225 millimeters of effective armor. Now look, don't get me wrong, that's really good, but most of the time people are just going to load gold and then they've got a much easier chance of being able to get through you. Don't get me wrong, this is a terrifying tank. And if you side scrape in this vehicle, you can still have 400 millimeters of effective armor, but then your upper hull becomes about 290. Now, your chance of being able to deal with a K-2 is to take advantage of the weak plate on the top. It's kind of got this stock IS-3 kind of turret. 30 millimeters of armor here means that all 91 millimeter caliber guns will easily be able to overmatch it. And if you don't have a high caliber gun, but you've got heat, you're easily going to be able to go through this part of the armor as well. Also, to the left of the gun, there is a little bit of an opportunity here, although you're going to need 260 millimeters of pen to reliably go through that. All in all, this is a very heavily armored tank that a lot of tanks will really struggle with being able to deal with. And it can even be able to reverse side scrape pretty well as well. But you're going to have to worry about the lack of gun depression over the back of the tank. But this will be tremendous for reverse side scraping as well. And if you've got the skills and the time to be able to perform this maneuver, you will do way better by reverse side scraping than you will do by, should we say, front side scraping, as that plate will become a little bit of a weakness. But it's actually not really too much of a difference when I think about it. When it's angled like this, apart from the tiny little bar that your opponents will be able to hit, which is very hard to hit, they ain't going through this unless they're tier 9 or tier 10 or they overmatch your turret. And so the K-2, it's like this juggernaut. Let's make a passing mention to the 340 meters view range, which is, I think, the worst at tier 8, which means that it's just not going to be able to spot for itself as well. So take advantage of that at long range and be able to pummel it without it being able to see you. All in all, this is a tank that puts all of its statistics in one basket. It's slow, it's got bad gun handling, it's got bad firepower, it's got bad view range, but it has tremendous durability with great hit points and great idiot-proof 45 degrees armor angling. Crew-wise, the K-2 is very generic for a Soviet tank. The commander is the radio operator. You've got yourself a gunner, a driver, and a loader, so it will work for all manner of Soviet heavy tanks, making this a good candidate for all top-tier Soviet heavies apart from the IS-7, because of course that has a dedicated radio operator and you don't want to lower the view range anymore. Equipment-wise, I personally would like to use a durability device on this vehicle with vents and a turbo. The durability device will allow you to keep your tracks on and allow you to keep mobile and keep side scraping. The turbo will allow you to have the mobility to actually get around the battlefield, because this thing is abysmally slow otherwise. And I'm personally using vents because I want to try and improve everything about the tank: the accuracy, the view range, the traverse speed, the horrible aim time, rather than trying to focus on boosting the damage per minute of the vehicle by 7%. However, if you absolutely, utterly have to, maybe drop the vents to use vert stabs to be able to get yourself some better gun handling, or probably an aiming device on this vehicle to improve its accuracy, or if you really want to pump up its abysmal firepower, get yourself a gun rammer instead. Field mods wise, this vehicle is super simple. I'm going to take all-terrain suspension to be able to actually get around the battlefield. I'm going to improve the accuracy of the vehicle, and I'm going to improve the view range. And that's everything you need to know about the K-2. Let's see how it performs on the battlefield. So just quickly, to show you all, I'm going to be using regular equipment for this tank review. But I do expect that this is the kind of vehicle that will do very well with any kind of advantage it can get. Boy, is this thing slow. So today I'm going to be using a durability device, vent, and a turbo in all of my games. In retrospect, I wish I'd put the turbo inside the mobility slot instead of the vents, because honestly, that 1 kilometer an hour top speed and probably even the power to weight ratio advantage of having the turbo inside the mobility slot would probably outweigh having 1% cruise skill on this tank. I'd be willing to sacrifice that 1% cruise skill just to be able to gain any kind of mobility, because this thing is so sluggish. It is literally a Soviet slug, just getting around the battlefield, just hoping that its opponents, I guess, are going to stay there, or hoping that your team is not going to finish everything before you actually manage to get into the fray. I had so many games in the K-2 where, frankly, I just felt like I was an archaic tank. I felt as if I was, should we say, vulnerable because I wasn't able to retreat because of the vehicle's awful reverse speed, so I have to commit to a flank. You can't turn back if your allies don't actually go and contest, shall we say, what is stereotypically the heavy tank fights. And even then, your opponents might not be there, and you're in a very awkward scenario about trying to chase, or maybe your allies are just really, really good and actually pick up all of the kills and all of the damage, and you're just left like a turtle on its back. This is kind of like the argument of who won. Was it like the tortoise or the hare? Well, I can tell you, in modern World of Tanks, it's usually not the tortoise. Unless it's actually the Tier 9 British tank destroyer, but that thing's literally packing like about twice, if not 3 times, the damage per minute that this vehicle is. Not even exaggerating. Because a tank like this, at least for me, I'm not going to try and maximize that damage per minute because it's the weakest aspect of the vehicle. I'm going to try and mitigate its strength in the form of its durability with the durability device on this vehicle, and trying to mitigate its main weakness, which is the mobility of the vehicle, with a turbo. Oh dear, that 430U got absolutely trounced in front of me by the 705A, but looks like he's on fire for the second time this game, and so we can sneak up behind them and not deliver a heat round to the side of their turret. Intuition is a must on this tank. There is a massive disparity in the penetration of the rounds. It's standard ammunition with 203mm of pen, and it's heat with 270. And what's weird is the heat rounds actually travel faster than the AP rounds on this tank. Of course, I don't want to waste my heat willy-nilly, even if I am on a press account here. I'm still going to play as if I was playing on my regular account. I'm going to switch back to an AP round there for the WTF Panzer IV. In retrospect, I probably could have tried to make the HE shell work, which actually has the same shell velocity as the AP, but it's just a little bit risky with trying to make HE shells connect cleanly with the way that they fly. But I guess if it's got the same shell velocity, it's going to fly in the same way, so a little bit of a misplay there by me. So what I want to show you right now is look at the armor of this tank. I'm not just using it against tier 6s, I'm not just using it against tier 7s and cherry picking those magical games for all of you. What I'm doing is showing you how the K-2 performs against tier 10 tanks with regards to its armor. We've ricocheted a T-30, a WTF Panzer IV, and a Stridsvagn 103B twice. We've managed to ricochet already enough damage to destroy this tank a couple times over. And I'd like to highlight that once you've got all the field mods on this tank, which will increase the health points by 3%, and you stack it with a durability device, we are packing 1,870 hit points. That is well within the region of a tier 9 heavy. Look at that AMX M451 on the enemy team. It's got 1,900 hit points. I'm only 30 short of that. Now, while they might not be using a durability device, I just feel like it scales very well on this tank, and it's something that I would thoroughly recommend considering. Especially when you also consider the fact that this thing, it wants to angle at 45 degrees. This is over-angling in so many tanks, but not in this one, because you've got such thick lower side armor on this vehicle of 150, you just don't really worry about it. And you're almost like baiting your opponents into shooting that side armor. Well, maybe, as we're going to be seeing later on in the gameplay. But what I wanted to highlight is that when you are just chilling on a ridgeline like this, this thing feels so immensely strong. And that's why I like the durability device, to just be able to make the sustainability of the vehicle just go further. And also, because of that side armor, I quite often found myself side scraping in this tank, and so having a durability device on the vehicle will make your tracks more healthy, so you're not locked down. And when you've got that horrible mobility on this vehicle, you want to do everything that you can to try and avoid being locked down in place, because as soon as you get overwhelmed or swarmed by your opponents, or they do manage to get your side armor completely flush on, or God forbid get the rear of your vehicle, then you truly are struggling. But gosh, look at this gun. We've got terrible DPM, we've got mediocre alpha damage, we've got awful penetration, we're going to have to fire a lot of gold rounds. And, yeah, we got bad accuracy as well. So even after we finally managed to load that shell in, it is a little bit awkward with even being able to deliver it to the enemy tank. But, look, when I try and look at tank reviews, I'm not just looking at them from my perspective. I'm a flashy, fast player who wants to go in and overwhelm my opponents with usually excessive firepower. But not everybody likes to play World of Tanks in that way. Some people like a more methodical approach. Some people like to take their time on a ridgeline or take their time in an engagement. And honestly, for players like that of you out there, this vehicle's not going to end up being the worst thing you ever play. But for everyone else, I can imagine it ending up being quite a frustrating ride in World of Tanks. And frankly, there are way better vehicles that you could be able to spend your money on. I honestly think the 703-2 is going to end up way more competitive than this vehicle, apart from when you need ridiculous armor. I think the Skoda T56 is going to laugh at this thing. The fact that this thing has 390 alpha damage and pretty much takes as long as the Skoda takes to reload an entire magazine to load a single shell. Yeah, I really can't end up recommending a vehicle like this when there's something like a Skoda T56 in the game. Now, this compared to a BZ-176, it's a completely different can of worms, really. This one definitely has a better kind of gun handling than the BZ-176, but the BZ-176 has that 800 alpha damage, and the BZ-176 has way better gun depression on a ridgeline than this vehicle as well. But I was really happy with this game. 3,500 combined, it's not the best result we're ever going to have for a K-2, but it was against tier 10 tanks and showing you just how resilient this is. There aren't many tier 8 heavies, if any tier 8 heavies, that would as consistently block 4,700 damage when getting shot by tier 10 tanks. So round 2 for the K-2. We are defending against an assault on Karelia, and we're in one of those kind of situations where there's no traditional side scraping in a vehicle like this, so we're going to just have to come around the corner. Unfortunately, you'll notice that when you angle at 45 degrees, if you're on a bit of a slope like this and your opponents are above you, yeah, the armor can be a little bit awkward. And it feels weird that I just have such bad damage per minute here that while I just don't have any advantages. I think that's really it. If your armor is fallible and your opponents manage to deal with it, boy, you just feel like you're so far behind. I guess the only real advantage that I have is just my hit points and being able to hopefully force my opponents into making a mistake or waiting for them to shoot one of my allies. Just kind of dirty World of Tanks work. It's really weird to play a tier 8 heavy tank that literally has such a bad gun that it would be probably considered the worst at tier 8 like this vehicle has. And outside of that armor, the tank just has absolutely no strengths. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out and what I'm trying to convey in this video is it worth sacrificing literally everything about the tank to be able to gain one aspect that makes it strong? Think about something like the Tortoise, for example. Is it worth sacrificing all of the mobility and the flexibility, the turret, and all of that good stuff just to be able to get the amazing damage per minute? And a lot of people would say yes, although arguably the Tortoise also has really good durability as well. But sometimes firepower is enough to be able to overwhelm your opponents. But in that fight there against the 257, while we did have to spam gold, we had to literally fire 5 gold rounds against the 257, eventually we were able to bring him down. It did take us a couple of minutes to be able to do so, but it was enough. But this vehicle, I just feel so confident in scenarios like this, where an unexpected tank appears up. And my opponents just really stand no chance. I can be angled at 45 degrees, I don't need to be so hull down, but oh dear, look at this. 203 millimeters of pen, unable to go through an IS-3 upper hull when it's angled like that. That's simply preposterous. I guess in this situation, I could either fire at the, I could overmatch the top of the tank, I could have aimed and missed the track link that actually counts as 20 millimeters of extra armor on that vehicle, but unfortunately my shell did just manage to go through. And look at this thing trying to aim at long distances. You're kind of just flinging your shots against your opponents and just helping, or hoping really even, that they're going to be able to hit. But we managed to get through it. It might have taken us 4 minutes, but we did actually manage to get 2,700 combined, a couple of kills, and this game is still neck and neck. So in this kind of a situation, just, oh, that gun handling. But wait, he actually manages to hit. Useful, very useful to actually deal damage to your opponents in these premium tanks. Aiming, 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 and the tank dies. But pretty much just my life and story in the K-2. You can't have everything on this tank. It's the kind of tank that I'd love to have like 6 different pieces of equipment on. I want to have an aiming device so I'm accurate. I want to have vert stabs so I actually have good gun handling. I want to have coated optics so my view range isn't absolutely abysmal even with a maxed out crew like I have. I want to have the durability device to improve my tank's hit points, which is the main aspect of strength this vehicle has. Its durability. If it doesn't have that, it doesn't have anything. I want to use a turbo so I'm just not slow, man. There's so many things that I want to use on this vehicle, and I think it's going to come down to preference as to what you want to choose to use on this vehicle. Again, personally for me, it's going to be the durability, a turbo inside the mobility slot, and then slapping vents on there as an extra. And I'll probably have a second build where maybe I drop the vents to be able to... I don't know. Actually, no, I think that's pretty much like a one-size-fits-all kind of build. It's my go-to generic super heavy build for a tank like the Mouse or a tank like the Panzer 7, for example. All those kind of tanks which are just designed to survive and outlast their opponents rather than managing to try and outblaze them with firepower. And so if you're the kind of person who wants to outlast them, maybe the KV2 is going to be, well, the K2 is going to be the one for you. So now I want to show you a couple of examples of where this tank is just incredibly frustrating and things just go wrong, and also maybe a little bit hilarious as well as to how your opponents try to deal with the armor of this vehicle. So I'm playing on Pearl River, and this is the kind of the map where you just have to commit to a situation. However, in a scenario like this, once I've committed, there's no way that I'm ever going to be able to escape. But watch how proficient the KV2's armor here. All we have to do, I keep calling this the KV2 by the way. I mean K2, all right? It's gonna take me a while. It's so similar, it's gonna take me a while to be able to get used to that. But look at this thing's armor, man. We're just sitting in front of 3 vehicles, and they're trying to figure out how they can deal with us. And eventually they manage to hit the lower plate. The STA-1 is spanking in heat rounds that I believe have about 285 millimeters of pen that are just unable to deal with us. And we're putting our damage in. Unfortunately, the Tiger 2 and the IS-3, they're not firing regular rounds, by the way. They are spamming gold at my tank. And I am just outlasting 3 opponents in this situation. And if you can keep them at this kind of distance, and you can hide that lower plate, just perfect armor usage there. And for this thing is ridiculous. I'm holding back 3 separate tanks. I've managed to deal 1,500 damage, which is not too bad. Make that 2,000 damage. But now what? Now what? I don't have the mobility to escape. I don't have the firepower to be able to take out tanks quickly. And from that perspective, this thing is very frustrating. And it's an incredibly hard tank for wargaming to balance. Whenever you take a vehicle and you put one of its statistics up to 11, effectively, like they have done with this vehicle, you can't be a well-rounded tank, and you're going to end up in frustrating situations like this. So now we join the K2, where I've got myself isolated. I'm in a very awkward scenario where I'm trying to fight a T-69, an IS-22, and an IS-3 all at the same time. And it's all about trying to just angle your armor towards wherever the threat will be, a bit like when you're fighting in a Mouse. Unfortunately, the IS-3 on the enemy team caking gold at this tank, and frankly, you should fire gold at this vehicle with its armor being so good. Good luck trying to go through it if you don't. But it's kind of funny that you can just go at 45 degrees, a bit like a Mouse at tier 10, and just be able to ricochet whatever. It does feel like there's quite a lot of fun and intelligence in using the armor with regards to trying to be reactionary. So I can't get myself into a situation where I'm in a little bit of a crossfire here, so I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to get the IS-3, but oh dear, there's also a Scorpion G on the enemy team. Luckily, I put 1 round into the IS-3, and in this situation, I got a Borask now tagging my backside. And it looks like I should be doomed now, right? And spoilers, yes, I am doomed. But just look at how much we are going to be able to block as we're going down. Just how silly is this? 2,770 damage blocked. Am I going to be able to survive to get another shell in here? I'm down to 13 hit points. And we get another one in. And what I want to show in this last game is that this thing's durability allows it to survive to still deal half decent damage. Even when you get yourself in situations like this, when you're in a 1 versus 5 scenario where you're trying to hold back a third of the enemy team in a situation. This thing is so darn durable that it's really hard for me to be able to figure out of whether it's going to be a good tank or not. I think it's the kind of tank that's going to be very matchmaking dependent. If you get yourself against tier 6s and tier 7s, I think this thing will really perform. But let's be honest, the vast majority of the time you're going to have to deal with tier 8s, 9s or 10s, and as soon as they start to fire gold at you, then you're going to really despise the fact that you have no other advantages that can just be negated in the dab of a 2 key. And so all in all, the K-2. I can tell you that this vehicle was probably one of the least fun premium tanks I've ever played in World of Tanks. I'm sure eventually, when I get this thing on my main account and I play it and I'm grinding credits at the same time, that I'll have that one magical game where I get to side scrape and everyone comes at me one by one, or maybe there's just a whole horde of bad players on the enemy team who only fire standard rounds, and I get into that magic scenario that this thing could end up blocking an insane amount of damage and having a real good time with it. But it just doesn't feel right to have such a bad gun, to have such bad mobility that gets compounded with very poor view range on this tank. And it's just, I just don't think it's going to end up being that competitive outside of its armor. And this vehicle really brings up a whole host of mixed emotions. Number one, I'm happy it's not just another overpowered heavy tank going into the game like a Skoda T56 or a BZ176. However, Wargaming's kind of complete lack of balancing with vehicles like this really makes a tank like the K2 a real hard sell. And considering that it's going into the game with 20,000 units available, I'd be very surprised if this vehicle doesn't reach at least about a 15,000 gold price tag. But honestly, I really wouldn't recommend this tank. Outside of side scraping, reverse side scraping, or just being like a very durable juggernaut that will be able to handle all of the very bad players on the enemy team, it's really not all that fun, and I don't even think it's going to make you that many credits, especially in the fast meta game that World of Tanks currently is. And so I would personally recommend avoiding the K2, ladies and gents, boys and girls, and I think you'll do far better with something like a Defender or using the Object 703-2. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my tank review for the K2. Hope you enjoyed it. If it was and you thought it was useful, give the video a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about the K2. Do you think that it looks like a completely overpowered tank? Do you think it looks absolutely horrendous? Are you going to bid on one today? Or is this one that you can let slip by? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.